If you can all take your seats, we'll get started right now. We're very pleased to have with us today the Secretary General's Special Representative on Children in Armed Conflict, Virginia Gamba, who's here to talk to you about the 2018 report on children in armed conflict. That report is now out on the UN website, and you will have seen that we issued in the past hour the Secretary General's statement on that, so you should all have that available. And now to discuss the report further with you, we have Virginia Gamba. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all of you for coming to this briefing. So, of course, I'll answer all the questions. I thought I just can give you some of the highlights of the report and an analysis of that highlight. I think, as you know, we always cover the year that was, so it's January to December 2018, and it is the 20 situations on the agenda. I think the overall numbers, the number of violations reported for last year are the highest we've had. It's 24,000 verified grave violations, so this is a very important number to take into account. This is the sum of the 20 situations across 6 violations, of which 5 are listable, the rest are not. Recruitment and use, killing and maiming, sexual violence, attacks on schools and hospitals, and abduction. And we also, of course, verify denial of humanitarian access, but this is not the trigger for listing. We also sometimes, for all our situations, you will see, we make a particular effort to also put detention, although it's not a listable violation, and we also make an effort to put military use of schools, although, again, this is not necessarily a listable violation. In the annexes of this year's report, we have 64 parties to the conflict that are listed for grave violations against children. 9 are state actors, and 55 are non-state actors. So we have verified the highest number. There's 2 high numbers in the report, which are firsts for us. One is very bad, one is very good, and we're right now analyzing the sum of both and what does it really mean for the docket. So the highest number of children killed and maimed in 2018, more than 12,000. And this is the highest number we've ever recorded since 2005 on this violation. I think it's particularly interesting that it is the 10th anniversary of Resolution 1882, which gave my office the ability to monitor killing and maiming and sexual violence. And if I have to say very quickly, of between 2017 and 2018, all violations are decreasing, all of them, except one, which is sexual violence against children, which is exactly the same amount as the year before. So that is a plateau that has to be broken, and we're not making any inroads into breaking that plateau. The rest have all decreased. But killing and maiming has gone up. And so that figure is very, it's sad to see that the two that are the same and up are the two that we should have some good results after 10 years of working on it. So that's a little bit big disappointment and very sad for us to see. Let's see what other things I can tell you about this. I told you that there was another figure that is very, very interesting this year, and it's a first. We've never had the record number of children released as we had last year. 13,600 plus children released. Again, this is a major improvement on previous years, and you know, within the parameters of 2017 to 2018, recruitment and use is down, but with the release being so much higher up, there is room for hope that there will be more children released and separated from armed groups, which brings a different type of worry. Are we ready to receive them, or will they go back because we were not ready to receive them and provide them with the reintegration assistance that they desperately need? Where most of the children have been released, again, an interesting fact, we're trying to tie the knots here. But last year there was also a record amount of peace agreements, peace dialogues, and peace processes were ongoing at any one given time. From Yemen to Myanmar to CAR to South Sudan, we had an amount of peace processes. And what we have noticed repeatedly is every time that we engage, our child protection actors engage with armed groups, particularly, to convince them to sign a joint action plan with us, as part of that process emerges a trust-building exercise which many times is demonstrated through the release of children along the way. So a joint action plan will lead to release of children, particularly if that joint action plan is about recruitment and use. So I think this explains to a large extent the amount of children that have been separated last year. In all of the cases, there was some type of dialogue, some type of peace process, or a joint action plan being developed with my office through our child protection operators on the ground. This leads us to say, really, that peace is ultimately the only way in which we're going to try to keep children out of this situation for any foreseeable future. And we can discuss this if you want further as we go along. I think we've also been a good year for action plans. We engaged many actors. We managed to get last year in that period, January to December, 3 action plans signed. So we're up on action plans that are active and that are beginning to move. And of course, we started this year also with some good examples of that continued engagement. Now, if you ask me which are the situations that I am most concerned, again, you have to read the report in a horizontal manner. But without a doubt, the one situation that really, to my mind, is the worst one, the one that we have to do our utmost to try to reverse, is Somalia. And I just want to tell you, sometimes when one focuses violation against violation in a list of 6 by country, you will see huge numbers on one violation and very little on the others. The only one situation where all the numbers are very high, all of them, all the violations on all the categories, Somalia. So I want to just make a plea right now to keep an eye on Somalia. If anybody can assist us in engaging in Somalia, right now there is no engagement, but it's desperately needed. There's been over 1,000 children killed and maimed. There's been 2,300 children recruited last year alone. There's been 375 children in detention. There's been sexual violence against 331 children. There's been 77 attacks on schools. There's been 14 attacks on hospitals, and this year we're trying to make a differentiation between schools and hospitals. And there's 1,609 children abducted. The denial of humanitarian assistance in Somalia is horrific, 74. It's doubled from the prior years. These figures are doubling year on year. So I think without a doubt, if you add these numbers, 1,041, 2,300, 1,100, 1,600, throughout the violations, you can see a picture emerging that is very worrisome. And there are other ones that I'm very happy to answer, but I think without a doubt, this is possibly our worst situation today, and the one that I'm very concerned. I will be traveling to Somalia, hopefully, in the next 2 months, and try to see if there's any possibility of engaging and stopping this bleeding. So with those considerations, I'm happy to answer questions from you.
Okay, we'll turn over the floor to questions. Please introduce yourself to our speaker, Michelle.
Thank you, Farhan. Thank you, Ms. Gamba. Michelle Nichols from Reuters. First of all, just a quick clarification. Presumably there's a caveat that this 12,000 figure is conservative because it's only the things that the UN has been able to verify. Is that accurate? And then every year, as you know, since 2015, this report has generated some controversy with some of the countries who've been listed and not listed. Could you enlighten us a little as to what sort of lobbying you faced from which countries? Was it sort of anything out of the ordinary, unacceptable? Any comments appreciated?
Very good. Thank you very much for both those questions. They allow me to expand a little bit more. It's absolutely conservative figure. And I have to say, I'm devastated that for the last 3 years, every year, my child protection actors have been reduced. And frankly, if this continues, there will be no possibility of monitoring and reporting anything if this continues. And the issue of cost-cutting around the soft part of any peace operation or peace support operation is ridiculous. And the issue that UNICEF doesn't have the resources they do so much already. They are sometimes the only ones present to help children in the hour of need. But they also engage in monitoring. And the assumption is that the monitors are the sum of all the agencies that are present in any one space of any situation. They have to collaborate, and then the highest ranking United Nations official in that country, plus the representative of UNICEF, co-sign my 3 monthly reports that I get, upon which I present to the Security Council Working Group. So without the group of people that does this monitoring, we cannot get a real picture. So I have made my own assumption because I know the resources on the ground. I also know the areas where we are denied access. And I have to say there's 2 situations where our monitors have been threatened and humanitarian workers have been killed and abducted in the course of their work. So, and we have received threats to monitors in some situations. So my concept, my estimate is that right now, at huge difficulty for a very small team, we might be able to perhaps verify some 30% of what is there. So I think it's huge. I think the numbers really are huge. That's why, for me, the issue of peace is so important, because what we've noticed is the other part of it. When you look at our reports, we're trying now to differentiate between old verifications and new ones. You will see in some parts of the report that it says these are old verifications. What happens? If we're denied access, the report we have of that violation stays in our database. And as soon as there is access or a possibility of accessing, then one tries to back reference and back verify that one. And then it is presented in the next years as soon as it's verified. So what we've noticed in some countries as areas become open to monitors is that we get a lot of violations verified that had been just reported, and we can only use verified ones as figures. So then you will see a rise in figures. Some of them are because the situation is worse, but some of them is because we have access. So it's a bit complicated, but I think 30% is what we are verifying at the time, and we have the possibility of doing. We need much more resources. As relates to the annual report, you're absolutely right. Every year around this time, it's like Christmas, Everybody is waiting and watching and worried. But luckily, with Secretary General Guterres, he has such a different approach to the issue of protection of children in armed conflict. And he gave me the instruction from the day that he appointed me that he expected to see permanent and constant engagement with all parties. The idea being you protect children now. You don't wait a year later to protect children. So you engage totally all the time. And I think that engagement has paid off because the pressures that you would think might arrive around this time of the year, I'm sure would be there if there had been a silence procedure for a year with the parties to conflict. But that has not been the case. So every time we're concerned about something in any situation, we try immediately to engage and to try to convince the parties, to stop the violation or to put in place measures immediately, even before an action plan is derived. And that means that there's a lot of transparency. There's a lot of give and take, and there's a lot of conversations. This reduces the element of lobbying that perhaps one has seen in the past, and that we were very worried with this SG that this would pass on to his Secretary General moment. But this has not been the case. So we have not received any undue pressure from any party. At least my office has not, and as far as I know, he has not either.
James?
Can you, particularly talking about the list at the end, which you are mandated to provide to the Security Council, can you, hand on heart, say that list is based solely on facts and not as the result of political pressure? Because human rights groups have certainly questioned the list you've come up with. Why, for example, with a massive increase in the deaths of Palestinian children at the hands of Israel, are they not on the list? How can the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen still be on a list where they're making measures to protect children for the third year running, and yet they're still killing so many children?
Well, you know, I could answer this in many different ways. I think there will be a very formal answer, which is the listing is entirely up to the Secretary General, and it is his prerogative, and he can decide to do as he sees fit. Now, on the other hand, I can answer in the way that is what I believe an honest reply. The honest reply is that we get this information every 3 months. The public at large only gets it once a year. So the figures that public receives when you say facts, it is a general amount, but in the eyes of my office and in the eyes and at the request of the Secretary General, he gets this by portion every 3 months. And so it would be unbecoming of the report to say we're particularly concerned about the killing and maiming of children in the month of X in such a country. It would be wrong. We have to add that in a 12-month period. But we would know if there is a decrease or an increase, and the SG always looks at the patterns over the year. If over the year there is a pattern of decrease, even though the year started with a very high number, that should not be put in the report. It's the totality of the numbers. But in some of the situations that we cover, for example, there have been major operations or a major, very violent act in one particular moment. And you can refer that even to this year. Sometimes it's a massacre in a place that brings a lot of children to the table as victims. So we're very concerned. I usually issue a statement if there's something very, very bad, and I've issued several this year on the worrying situations I have now. But for last year, there has been a decrease in some of the instances through the year, and that can be directly related to measures put in place in that event. So in the case you were mentioning in relationship to the Saudi-led coalition, which is now called the Coalition to Restore Legitimacy in the Yemen, absolutely. You know, from mid of last year onwards, there has been many efforts to engage. It ultimately led to a joint action plan with all the coalition members, which was finally signed beginning of the year. But that was started as early as July last year. And as a result, there has been, we were able, through the facts, to show that the measures that had been put in place were having some effect. But at the same time, we cannot just wash the hands from the figures of that we're talking about, which are huge. So this is how you would interpret it.
Can I have a very quick follow-up? And it will be very quick, because your answer can be very quick. You say you can answer this question in many different ways. I'm going to ask you to answer it again with a yes or no. Is your list based on facts, or is it the result of political pressure?
It's based on facts.
Maggie.
Mrs. Gamba, I'm sort of still processing your answer to James's question, because it almost sounds like you're saying if you kill a lot of children in a month and then you don't kill them for the rest of the year, you're not going to be listed, which
is not true, because everybody's listed. I mean, the point is that particularly in relationship to the example that James asked me to engage, which was Yemen, they are listed. People have to understand. Parties are listed. In fact, the coalition to support the legitimacy in the Yemen has been listed for 3 years in a row. They're not delisted.
Right, but they're listed on the less bad list as opposed to the very bad list.
But it's not a less bad list. It's not a less bad list. That's the whole point. A and B both are perpetrators. But in one of the lists, we have engagement with them. Now, if you had not done anything in the year at all to engage, you would slip down, which is what happened, if you can see, with the SPLM North in Sudan. They were on list B. They have fallen down because for 12 months, they've not only refused to engage with us, done absolutely nothing to release the children or to grant us access to monitor, and they have an action plan with us, which is inactive for a year. They've gone down, back to A. So, this is how the list works. You can remain in B as long as you put some effort into that. If you don't, you go back. It is still a list of perpetrators, and still you have to try to get delisted. You can't do it out of thin air.
Okay, well, actually, my main question before you answer, James, was to ask you, are you concerned about the apparent growing number of attacks on schools and hospitals, not just in places where we hear about it daily, like Yemen and Syria, but places we don't hear about it, like South Sudan, which it's mentioned on the report this year?
Absolutely.
Is this a growing trend?
Absolutely. It's not just a growing trend, it's the most important of all the trends. And I think here you can actually see the tactics of war. And we're seeing more and more armed groups on purpose destroying schools, and particularly those that engage girls' education. And we're seeing a pattern emerging, and it is growing fast. And I was in Mali even 2 weeks ago, and you could see that pattern growing, and it's doubling the amount of attacks on schools. It seems to me that there is every intention of armed groups is to destroy the possibility of giving an alternative to children outside of a war usage. Because I've met with a lot of children, some of them that had been associated with armed groups and that had been shot, and met with them in Mali, and I've talked to them a lot to try to see, what would have made the difference in their lives, and the difference if the school had been open, if they had been able to have also not just alphabetization, but also have been trained on a skill. One wanted to be a mechanic, and there's a need for that. But there was nowhere where he can go and learn anything, and he has to survive. So I think it's a tactic. I really do. I think if you destroy schools, you're destroying choices. And for girls, it's fundamental,
Nabil?
Mrs. Gamba, in the report we have Israel and State of Palestine, but we don't see them in the list. So can you tell us about the engagement from both sides and about the measures taken or not taken to improve the protection?
Yes, I have to say this is a situation that we were very, very concerned about, and I just want to draw your attention, if you have not noticed it, there's something also quite extraordinary about this report, that for two situations, but particularly for this one, the Secretary General has given a new order. And I can read it to you. It says, I request my special representative to further examine the cases of maiming and injuries caused by Israeli forces and urge Israel to immediately put in place preventive and protective measures to end the excessive use of force. I call upon the Al-Quds and Al-Qassam brigades to immediately cease the recruitment and use of children, which we have verified. And I further request my special representative to further examine recruitment and use by armed groups. Now, this is rather sad that the Secretary General has to give me a special mandate. This is the first time my office receives this strong mandate of an examination which he expects me to finalize by December and to keep him abreast of it. I think in the situation of Israel and the state of Palestine, this year was a very complicated year for us because of elections. I have tried 4 times to go to the region since September last year and been unable to do so. I believe this language gives me the authority I need to press ahead with this examination. Again, you might say, why in this case? Again, if you read the report very carefully in the coming days, you will see that there is a differentiation in this report on definitions. Usually, the definition that is a violation is killing and maiming. Now, the interpretation of killing and maiming, particularly maiming, is very large. What does it constitute? What is it? It's the only situation where over 50% of those, you see the word maiming does not figure here, it figures injuries. And 50% of those injuries figure as tear gas inhalation. We need to examine this very carefully and see what are the effects of this. We know it required medical attention. As relates to deaths, we have verified 50 and 9 attributed on the other side of 50 Palestine children and 9 Israeli children. And almost all of these violations have been committed at the fence in the course of last year in the context of the March of Return. So I think I want to see by December what this really represents in relation to trends and patterns, and what it exactly represents in the issue of what the parties are willing to do to stop and prevent this situation from occurring. I have been unsuccessful in engaging, and as such now I have got the language I need to be able to do so before the end of the year.
So as a follow-up, you mean you don't have an assessment about the measures taken or not taken until you can go yourself and visit both sides, both Israel and State of Palestine? Or do you have a team working on the ground, or you don't have anyone until when you will be able to verify?
We have monitors. Of course we have monitors. We get information every 3 months. We have monitors. It's a very small group, but we do have monitors there, and there is a force there that is a UN-led group that sends me the information. That's not the point. I have sent so many letters. I have had so many bilaterals at the highest levels with parties to both of these actors, and it's just not satisfactory. It's like, they're not engaging with me in a manner in which I would hope to move this issue forward. It's very important that they respond, and right now there is let me put it this way. On the ground, we cannot complain, because last year, particularly in the second part of the year, our people on the ground had good rapport for the first time in months, particularly with the government of Israel, that they would be responding to written requests, and particularly to visit children in detention. And we have to note that. On the other hand, it was very preoccupying to start picking up the first verification of children recruited by Hamas. This is preoccupying, because we don't know if this is totally underreported or if it's a pattern or what is happening with that. But I get no engagement, I get no support to engage on these issues. So one of the things that we do is when we believe that my presence might make a difference in the opening up of the space and getting some traction, then I organize a visit. I've been trying to organize a visit. Perhaps now this visit will no longer be delayed.
Can I just get a quick follow-up? Just to answer the
Thank
question
you.
a little more directly, why weren't either parties listed? What factored into your decision not to list either of those parties, the Israelis or the Palestinians?
Well, I don't take that decision. The decision is taken by the Secretary General based on facts.
Did you recommend that he list?
No, I do not discuss that with the Secretary General. The way that the recommendations emerge is through a task group. The whole of the UN system, I meet with the whole of the UN system. I ask all of my partners, when my partners are dpi-ngo, dppa, UNICEF. I ask them, what are your beliefs? Is there any party here that should be we should be looking at or anything? And that information is passed to the Secretary General. And then he takes a decision on the facts base. But the point is, I'm trying to give you information here. There's 59 children killed, yes, verified, indeed, out of that. Detention is not a listable offense, so that leaves us with the issue of maiming. Maiming is not maiming. In this case, it's injuries. We need to understand the injuries better. The task force is doing a great job. All of these they have verified, and we're not in any case doubting the verification. But it is the only part where the addition of tear gas inhalation in the issue of demonstrations is included as a maiming factor. So I think it's very important that we look at a specific definition for the killing and maiming as a violation. I believe that the Secretary General will never take a decision until his information is, perfect. He keeps pushing me. He has always pushed me for more and more facts. And he is looking at a very creative way of looking at more and more information of what are the causalities. Outside of the case of Israel and Palestine, I'm not diverting, I'll go back to it. But for example, in killing and maiming globally, which is a huge figure, almost 40% of that is caused by UXOs, IEDs, and landmines, and anti-personnel landmines. A large proportion of that is caused because of crossfire that could, one could try to avoid. A large amount of that is caused by airstrikes and by bombing in developed areas, in populated areas. The Secretary General is immensely interested in every variation of the theme because he wants to see what could be put in place in that regard. So I think in the case of Israel, indeed, he's so concerned that he has asked me to examine this specific issue before the end of the year. So I think we have to just take it at that and wait and see what my examination will determine.
Thank you, Abdul Hamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arab. Madame Gamba, I have a few questions about the report and about Palestine and Israel. First, you said you tried 4 times to go there, but you couldn't. And can you explain you were denied entry or you for other reasons? And the second, you spoke about recruitment. Do you qualify children joining their families in a peaceful demonstration to protest the siege that Gaza has been going through for the last 12 years? Do you call that recruitment? And the third, you mentioned that 30 children of those killed, they were shot by live ammunition in the upper part of the body, 30 of them. Do you ever seen that pattern anywhere in the world that intentionally children are shot in the upper part to kill? They were shot to be killed by an army, by the official army of the state of Israel. And yet, they were not listed. Is there any other pattern in the world with that number of children shot and killed by live ammunition by the army of a state?
On the issue of entry, I think this was related to 2 items, most particularly the electoral process. My visits should not be used to politicize a situation just prior to elections in any way. And of course, the abnormality this year is that there will be another election again, which puts a cloud as to the moment when I can actually visit the area. The second condition for my visit is that my people on the ground inform me that it is the time when they need me. If you want, I'm the heavy at the end. They try We always try first with letters, with bilaterals. I do the marches. They do the same thing from the ground. If they feel that the only way they can break an impasse is through my visit, then they will ask me to go. So I don't go because I want. I go because the situation is ripe and the people on the ground need me, and this might make a difference. Now this is a bit different because I've been ordered to examine, and I think I'm starting on that issue immediately through the issuance of letters asking for engagement. I understand totally the frustration that you expressed, but I can answer you, recruitment and use is not what you described. It is what we have verified, which is different.
What
Yes.
about the last part of my question?
The shooting in the upper part of the body.
The children are not only shot on the upper part of the body. In a lot of other situations, they're also decapitated, and you know, they've also been knifed, and they've also been tortured to death by state parties in many situations, some of which have been listed and some have not. So again, you know, that is a prerogative of the Secretary General in the way that he examines the situation.
Did you see a similar situation where children are shot by the official army of a country in the upper part of the... But isn't that execution?
I don't understand why you want me to answer that question, because you're asking me to give you some type of reassurance that we are taking note of what is happening in Israel. I am reassuring you that we are taking note. We're taking note, and it's of great concern, and we're going to do something about that. But whether it is.
It was not listed.
Explain why it's not been listed.
Yeah, that's why
We're repeatedly asking you the same question. Why is Israel not on this list? They have killed 59 children. Not all of them were from tear gas inhalation. Some of them were executed. Why is Israel not listed? And if you can't answer the question, maybe the Secretary-General will come down here and answer it for us.
She's repeatedly explained.
We haven't understood it, so
that
can we
it-
have another explanation?
She's repeatedly explained that the inclusion of names on the list is the prerogative of the Secretary General once he gets the relevant information.
And she's also explained she needs more facts, but this happened well over a year ago.
Questions, please.
Just a clarification.
Please,
Well, just a-
please, everyone, let
Farhan.
the people who have not asked for the first time have a question.
Yeah, just a
Joe,
clarification,
Joseph,
though.
I-
Just a
We
clarification.
need to be able to follow up because this question has not been answered.
Purely clarification.
Why is Israel not
Miss-
listed?
Mrs. Gamba, you said you have these directions now from the Secretary General to go and investigate further. Does this mean that, depending on what you come back with by December for the Secretary General on this issue, does this mean that Israel or the Palestinians could be listed at the end of the year, depending on what you find?
Yes, it could mean that.
Yes, Joe?
Joseph Klein, Canada Free Press. Let me just go to the question of verification of the data, because you said that with your limited staff and resources, the verification process is not complete. So number one, I'd like to know what your sources of the data are for the number of children killed and injured that you reported and attributed directly to Israel. What are the sources of that data? Secondly, it was mentioned about the demonstrations. Were you able to differentiate the context in which these casualties occurred? In other words, was it in the midst of the throwing of Molotov cocktails, incendiary balloons, and other violence, or were they all, as far as you know, in peaceful demonstrations? And thirdly, was there any evidence of Israeli bombing of schools or hospitals that resulted in children's casualties during the reporting period?
Okay, well, I think no matter what I say, you will all be discontent. I think I confirm what I told you. that I believe the examination is precisely on that line. I have to say the Secretary General asked me really to further examine all the cases of injury and maiming caused by Israeli forces. He also asked me to engage in prevention measures with both parties to the conflict as requested by the resolutions. And he is calling very seriously on both parties to abide by their obligations under international law. We get a lot of information from the ground. What you said is who provides the information. And I've tried to answer that before. The way we operate is through the MRM. The MRM is a monitoring reporting mechanism. That mechanism was generated by the Security Council, and it has a very strict guidelines. We possibly are the one office in the whole of the Secretariat that has got the least amount of figures verified, because what can be called verified or not verified or reported or documented for the children armed conflict agenda is a very strict pattern. It can only be done by a UN official on the ground. And so because there is not, I don't have my own staff on the ground. We are a cooperative entity. So we are a group, and the group that is my task force, my core task force, is always made up of dpi-ngo, of UNICEF, ourselves, and in those cases with the special political missions of DPA, the DPA today. And this is the group that ensures that we do get the information from the ground. So who provides information from the ground? If there is a peacekeeping mission or if there is a special political mission, it would be the SRSG on the ground there, plus the representative of UNICEF, that together would have to sign and inform me that they agree that the information I receive is correct. And it's done through the monitors that is their officials on the ground in a pooled basis, But when there is no special political mission or special peacekeeping, it is the resident coordinator on the ground that has to provide the co-chairing of this group with UNICEF. So over there, it's every UN official. Now, there are many agencies that are on the ground. And some of the issues, for example, have to do with WHO, if they're on the ground, or ILO, if they're on the ground. Many times they do provide to the whole pool information. So this is the group of people that monitor the situation.
Well, actually, there were some related questions there in terms of the context in the demonstrations in which these casualties were alleged to have occurred. Were they all peaceful, as was described in a previous question, or was there any monitoring or verification as to whether there was violence, incendiary balloons, throwing of Molotov cocktails, etc.? And was the issue also of destruction of hospitals and schools? Was there any verification of that that was done by Israeli forces during the reporting period that resulted in the children's casualties? And where do these UN officials get the raw data? Is it from UNRWA on the ground, or is it from the administration controlling Gaza, for example, which would be Hamas, their reporting? Could you be a little bit more specific?
I can't be a lot more specific on the MRM mechanism on the task force on the ground. Like I said, we are very jealous of both the information in the database, because we need to protect victims and their families and anyone that testifies for us, but we also have to protect the monitors. And so, as I'm not prepared to go into in depth about who does this, just to reiterate that this is part of the MRM mechanism and it is being applied in the area. So when I just want to also make very, very clear that when I am ordered to go and examine particularly the issue of injuries on the ground, it's not because there is a doubt of the verified information that exists. I believe this is a very strong call from the Secretary General that something has to be done immediately, and he wants a much better and clearer picture of exactly what is happening, in what context is happening over there. And also, he wants to push for the prevention and stopping the violation to start in the first place. There's a lady in the back. Yeah.
Ibtisam.
Hi, my name is Ibtisam Azim from Al Arab Al Jadid newspaper. My first question will start with reading a comment from Human Rights Watch regarding the report. The comment says the Saudi-led coalition since 2015 has committed appalling violence against children in Yemen without any evidence that it's trying to improve its record by including them once again in the one not so bad category of serious reforms. The Secretary General makes a mockery of the whole exercise. So what's your comment on this? And then as a follow-up to that, you said that do you have any access, when you are saying that these countries are taking serious reform, can you control or can you monitor the serious reforms that you are talking about? In this example, the Saudi-led coalition, but also other countries. The second question is, again, about Palestine and Israel. I didn't understand, or let's say, why do you want to examine, why does the Secretary General want to examine these injuries if it's, or the report about more than 2,700 injured Palestinians, if it's a report from his own agencies? And do you do this, or are you intending to do this in other cases? Thank you. In other cases, I mean other countries.
Do what?
You said that you are intending to examine the number of...
Yes, I've been asked to do also an engagement. It's a different word. You know, the only word who is examining is here, but I have been asked as well in Afghanistan to engage in what is called, I think what he has asked me to do, I request my special representative to engage proactively and follow up on the implementation of all measures taken by the government and international forces to mitigate child casualties in Afghanistan. So that is the second unusual request I received in this report. So yes, there is another request. It's not specifically the word examination and prevention, but it is to be able to ensure that the measures that have been starting to be put in place since October, November last year, when we started engagement with the parties, is sustained and leads to decrease in violations. So what you were talking to me now, back to the first part of your question, NGOs can, of course, it's their job. They have to advocate and they have to keep the limelight on the issue, and we're very grateful. I get along very well with the NGOs. I meet with Watch List, several times in the year. I form part of a lot of their meetings. So absolutely, we have to support our NGOs. They have to continue to put pressure, and it is a very good job that they do. Whether we agree or not, in their interpretation is at this point irrelevant. I think more importantly for us is that every engagement we have undertaken in relationship to action plans that we have either developed and signed or have been updated, like the case with the Yemen government, are being monitored. And they are being monitored on the ground. And this is part of the confidentiality that all our action plans have. All our action plans are not open to the public. They are confidential because each one is unique. Each one it's a question of trust building, and also it's a question of having access to be able to monitor the way it's being managed. But ultimately, we always see it in the decrease in the number of violations for the violation for which parties were listed. And in that sense, we are absolutely convinced that we're going in the right direction and that we're going to see things changing very rapidly. It does take time. But we do have, like I said, we get information every 3 months, not once a year, so we can see the way things are moving. This is not something that the NGOs do get. They're not party to the same type of information except once a year, so we appreciate very much that they keep the pressure and the light on the violations. And let me just finish by saying one important thing. Once a year, it's always going to be a tragedy. It's always going to be a disappointment for a lot of different reasons every time we go forth with our annual report. But I think we're paying a real disservice to the children globally by not focusing as well on the real issue. And there is only one issue here, that armed conflict is like a bushfire. It consumes everything in its path. And the children are being consumed by conflict. And those that believe that you can contain the bushfire by firing up areas so that the fire cannot advance still are consuming children, whether controlled or in an uncontrolled way. Conflict will consume children. So I think we need to do everything in our power to better protect children, to better be there for them when they come out of it, if they come out of it, and to better prevent them suffering violations in the first place. And this can only be done through engagement, but also through support. We need resources, we need support, we need everyone to engage. And it's not possible that all the beans are laid on perhaps a peace process that does not have children at the heart of it, because many times if peace processes don't include provisions for children, and then suddenly you wake up to peace, these children will be lost because they will never be reintegrated, they will never be properly separated, reparations will never be made to them or to their families, and they will have no options, they will be uneducated, they will have no skills, and they will be shunned, and they will have a stigma. I really enjoy much more talking to children affected by conflict when I go to the ground than talking to officials of government or armed groups, because they have it very clear. Not one child has ever told me that they chose violence. Not one. Some of them were so scared, they didn't even know which way they were running, and they were shot by government forces, in many cases. So the point is, if you give the children a choice, they will never choose violence. But we are not doing anything about it. How can it be that 24% of all children released can never be reintegrated for lack of support? How can it be that you only have 3 months for reintegration and tracing back families? How can it be? So, naming and shaming and the lists, I want to make it very clear. My office was not born to name and shame and attribute and that's it. My office was actually born many years before we were given the mandate. That mandate is a tool for the office to do its job. The job is to raise awareness on the plight of children and to try to prevent the violation, better protect children. Some of the tools I have are given to me by the Security Council. Other tools I have are given to me by the General Assembly. And these tools we try to use. So think about it. When I was given the tool of monitoring and reporting, and I was given the tool of joint action plans, which are both Security Council resolutions, what was the object of it? The object of it is to engage immediately. When a party was listed, you had to engage immediately to try to reduce that violation. How can you engage if you don't have the identification of the perpetrator, right? So the list was always the annexes. Over the years, it's been seen very much as a blacklist. It's been referred to in that way. I'm not going to object to all of that. Attribution and naming and shaming is important. It's part of the pressure. It's part of the issue. But it's not the object of the exercise. The object is to generate better protection for children and stop the violation. And we will use any means to do that. Any means to do that. And we are using every mean to do that. But Resolution 2427 of last year gave us a much bigger scope. We don't need to wait for listing to engage now, because we have now a mandate for prevention, where it is said that both nationally and sub-regionally and regionally, I can do now plans of action for prevention, not just for stopping a violation. So we're doing both. We're trying to tackle it at both levels. And we owe that to the children. So I have no problem with that. And I just hope that the children can profit from the engagement. It's all I can hope for. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.